Okay, chapter 4. So I've talked about it a little bit, but she's a lot more clear on page 123 about her use of ecology. I know she's brought it up multiple times, but now she's really getting into this idea of post-human. It exists without us, like it exists without our active agency. There are algorithms that are agents the same way that that are actors, the same way that we're actors, and what we're going for is helping students orient towards agency so they understand how those systems or tools or whatever you want to label them, how they exist, how I coexist alongside them, and then how I have agency within that particular public sphere for discourse and for conversation, for becoming a member, for learning skills, for learning ideas, for changing ideas, for social change, because that's ultimately the goal, right? So on 123, she starts talking through, especially, it's right at the top, the post-human element, where she fits in, what the goal is. She says what this doesn't change is any ability to control the ecology or to dictate the terms of the public. The agency and the power that she's talking about is not to make a change. So if we go back to chapter 3 with the audiences, to say, okay, we're going to be a new kind of audience. It doesn't mean that me becoming an active member in a public moving towards social change is going to completely fix the issue. So like public education is not going to suddenly get all of the funding I think it deserves because I became actively involved. And changing those expectations and setting those expectations through the Habermasian theory is a big focus of hers in this constellation of theories that she has, and a part of why she's using the ecology. Those can't be the expected outcomes. They can't set the bar that high because ecology, these exist without me. These systems continue without me, although they can be impacted by me. That doesn't mean that they're going to be, the forest is not going to grow overnight. Not how any of this works. And so that's a part of what's going on. And that's where the ecology connection, especially if we think about it like with the forest growing overnight. If I cut down a tree and I plant 5 more, the 5 ones are still little compared to the giant tree. We're making it sizable for the video, compared to the giant tree that I cut down, right? And it's going to take years for those little trees to get to the bigger size. But it's going to happen a lot without me, but it's going to take time. So I have a lot of different variables that I don't have control over, but there are elements of the formation and elements of my participation as a member of the ecology that I'm not just an actor, I have agency. And that's the orientation she's trying to shift in this. Okay, so she starts on 123, kind of laying out that ecology overview. So I wanted to make sure that you saw that. And then I'm going to jump to page 144. And what I want to start off with, okay, so I've been teaching classes on digital rhetoric for a very long time, since grad school. And when I used to go to conferences and talk about some of the assignments I assigned. And for the longest time, okay, so here, just to be transparent, I finished my doctorate in 2013. So we're talking like 2007 to 2013. I was the grad student doing a lot of these activities, and then I started working, and so I've been working, and I still do these assignments, and I still go to conferences and talk about this. When I talk about how I assign topics and what I have students do with web writing, I always get a lot of questions. Like, the biggest one is what people think you should do in an assignment, and what a lot of people do with digital assignments is they say, okay, we're going to take this litmus test. Where do you students fall on these issues? And the list hot button issues, so are you pro or against medical marijuana? Are you pro or against abortion? Are you Democrat or Republican? And when they pick the side, then what is assigned to them is, okay, if you fell on side A, your research needs to be in community that follows side B. Go. And that's what they want students to study, so that taking on a subject position that is in opposition to their own subject position will help lead to the rhetorical practice development that will lead to more effective community discourse. She's not trying to heavily critique those, and I'm here not trying to heavily critique those, but none of us are positive that they work. And a lot of the ideas leading up to this, she's a little more transparent about it now that we're getting towards the second half of this book, are influenced by the fact that the early assignments that she assigned to students to help them, with this reorientation didn't work. They got the students where she wanted them to from the shift of perspectives, but they weren't also able to learn some of the writing skills that she needed them to as a part of the class, or that she was hoping they would as a part of the class. And so it's almost like when you do an assignment like that, like you kind of lose something. Students get, to an extent, so caught up in the messaging that it's even harder because they're unfamiliar with it. And so they have to build the baseline understanding of the message, the ideas, and then they have to build the baseline understanding of the messaging, the rhetorical practices. That's two huge steps that they have to take on. And then they have to analyze from a non-biased perspective 3 different rhetorical moves that we're asking them to make in an assignment like that. And so what she gets at, and she starts us on 144, is that type of an assignment. She's not naming it here. She's just kind of talking around it, which is where some of this might get a little confusing. Those 3 shifts are too much for students as writers. They're too much for us. I mean, I have a hard time finding new communities, even in ideas that I like. There is, because I listen to some podcasts, and so there are people who have authored books, and I loved their books. Like, this is for fun, pleasure reading, as well as scholarly reading, and I cannot stand their podcasts. Like, I try, I give it a few episodes, listen, and I'm just like, there's something about the medium translation where the rhetorical practices have changed so drastically that I'm out. I don't get it. I don't like it. It's not resonating with me. Even though it's familiar, like these are people that I adore. And I will also say vice versa. There is a romance podcast that I listen to. I love it so much. I love it so much. One of the people who does the podcast is also a romance writer. I don't like her books. I just don't. I don't find them enjoyable. I don't like the way that she writes the familiar tropes. I just don't like her books. I love her podcast. So it goes both directions, right? But that's definitely where, and this is where she's getting at with habituation. So again, I'm on page 144 with the idea of habituations. The ways that we already have practices and that we're already habituated to the internet, which comes along with the assumptions that both we and students carry, can't just be checked by requiring them to look at something that's the opposite of their belief, because that is a ridiculous amount of habituation changing that is required. And so there are definitely new ways to, and she's calling it new habituations, there are ways to assign this approach so that the rhetorical practice and the rhetorical analysis that we're asking students to work through is possible. And it's very doable, and she's finding results with it. But we really need to, and this is her focus, pay attention to assignment design, like what she's getting at in the second half. And I would say I ran our faculty professional development center for 4 years. I worked very closely with an instructional designer leading up to that, which is a part of why I took that position on. And then I still work with that instructional designer. So I feel like compared to a lot of people, I have a richer language, not full, but I have a richer language for assignment design than a lot of people. So there's not a lot of assignment design language in here, but that's what she's getting at, is the assignment design to develop public orientations needs to really focus on what habituations do students come with, or if we're just doing it ourselves as a self-experiment, because I've had students come to me to do, I had a student years ago who came to me and he was a big sports fan, and he's like, I want to reorient and see what happens when I consume my sports fandom through only female or just LGBTQ-led media spaces. And it was a shift in orientation, and it was something that he came up with himself, and it's what she's getting at here. How do we get those new habituations and what's connected to all of that? The other thing that we're seeing in here, similar to what I said in an earlier video, we're seeing her start to work through the handbook ideas. Rhetorical theory development comes alongside rhetorical pedagogy. So she's talking about both her constellation of theories and how they are developing a working rhetorical theory for her point, which is this idea of publics and reorienting students towards publics. But that's always connected. It's not just that she wants to talk about public sphere and this idea of discourse, especially digital public spheres. She wants to talk about digital public spheres and the connection to reorienting students toward public orientations, or developing public orientations so that they exist as slightly different agents instead of just actors within these audiences. And so starting on 144, that's where we really see the shift in her language to go to that new point, and where we see connecting back to our prior understanding. This is what a contemporary like development of a handbook of rhetorical theory looks like. A little bit messy, a little bit combination of constellation of theories, assumptions about rhetorical theory, and a connection to rhetorical pedagogy, and assumptions about what we understand about rhetorical pedagogy and assignments that are typically offered within writing spaces that are supposed to form the baseline of our understanding that's supposed to already be there. But she's assuming, well, if you're to this point where you're talking through the assignments, you must have, some sort of an awareness of these, okay? So then she kind of ends the chapter really focused and heading towards pedagogy and theories of pedagogy. If you have questions about chapter 4, let me know.